What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Courtside here on the Basketball Network. I'm Caleb, and I'm joined by my good friend Connor, and we also have a special guest today, Riley. But first, I'll send it over to Connor. How are we doing?
Doing good, Caleb. Excited to be back. Enjoyed some good football this weekend. There's a lot of good games on, but I'm ready to talk about basketball.
Hey, same here. And Riley, what is up? First time on the podcast and first guest. How we doing?
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to get into this basketball for a special episode.
Very special indeed. Thanks for joining. Well, before we jump into it, I real quick just want to go over what we have on today's show. So we'll be continuing our series of going over each division and previewing them and putting each team in one of the four different categories, whether a team's a contender, a playoff lock, maybe fighting for the play-in bubble side of things, or in a complete rebuild. And for this one, we got the Southwest Division. So you can see from some of the merch that we're wearing today, some of us might have some favorite teams in this division. So excited to get to it. We'll talk about whether the Mavs can make it back to the finals. Are the Spurs a big deal this year? And maybe the Rockets, can they make some noise and make it to the playoffs this year as well? But before we jump into that, let's go ahead and jump into our transition three. So the first set of news we have in the world of basketball this week is the Boozer twins, Caden and Cameron Boozer, have decided to commit to Duke and follow their father, Carlos Boozer, in his footsteps. Connor, what's our initial thoughts on this big piece of news?
Obviously a big win for Duke. I know we talked about this about a month or so ago, and this was kind of what we were expecting. Considering another school, but I don't know. I feel like this was a pretty predictable school that they were going to commit to. Like you said, Carlos Boozer played there. Obviously, Coach K is no longer there, but I think Shire has done an amazing job filling in so far. But huge gift for Duke.
For sure. And Shire has been on a tear with the recruiting classes. I mean, bringing in Cooper Flag and obviously having some more 5-stars coming in next year, and then adding the Boozer twins for the 2026 class. Cameron Boozer being the second-ranked recruit in 2026, and then followed by his twin brother Caden out at 21 ranked recruit. So just a stack of a dynamic duo that's going to be going over to Duke, and actually chose them over Miami. Riley, no, you might not have followed these two as much as of recent, but do you have any thoughts on this one?
It's a good get for Duke when you can land 2 5-stars at any school. But I guess when your name's Duke, it doesn't really matter. You'll get everybody that you want. Cooper Flag. So yeah, they're Duke's gonna be Duke.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, moving on to the NBA side of things, we actually have some big injury news that just came out. Paul George just came out that he had an injury, which was a bone bruise, and this was reported by Shams to his left knee, and he's going to be reevaluated in approximately 1 week. So might not be a huge injury, but something to keep an eye on, as he has just joined forces with Joel Embiid out at the 76ers. Hoping this is something that won't last too terribly long, but something to keep an eye on. Connor, what's our initial thought here?
Caleb, do you remember a few weeks ago when we were talking about the 76ers, what is the one thing that I was talking about the 76ers? Paul George's health, which I know this is a minor injury. Sometimes these minor injuries, though, just keep nagging you the whole season. Don't let you play at your best throughout the whole season. Hopefully Paul George can get some rest over these next couple of weeks before the NBA starts. But yeah, like I said, Paul George's health is critical to this 76ers and if they'll be successful or not. Kind of getting off to a rocky start in that realm right now.
And he was looking good in preseason too, but not only Paul George for the 76ers, we got to watch out for injuries just all across the board. I feel like that entire team is pretty injury prone, specifically Joel Embiid as well. So hoping they can stay healthy. But Riley, since you're on the podcast, give us your thoughts on Paul George joining the 76ers. Any thoughts or predictions for that team in this upcoming season?
That if he has a long-term injury, that's a pretty big blow for the Sixers. But that's kind of just what keeps happening when you go out and sign or trade for an aging star. Always seem to end up on the shelf, and not out there as much as you're going to be paying them. Um, but I expect Tyrese Maxey to pick up the slack while if Paul George misses extended time.
Yeah, I agree. And I think hopefully this one's not too terribly serious. It looks like Shams is reporting that it shouldn't be that long, but you never know with these things. I feel like we see it in a lot of sports where it's mentioned that players are going to only be out a week or two, and the next thing you know, they've missed half the season. Or in the instance of the NFL this year, Christian McCaffrey might not play at all this season, and we didn't even know he wasn't going to play week one. But jumping into our last piece of news for the transition three today, the NBA and specifically ESPN came out with their NBA rankings of the top 100 players. Specifically, right now, they listed out number 100 all the way down to number 51. This came out this morning. And we might have some hot takes because we were looking over this list and I'm not so sure ESPN got it right. Riley, I know you mentioned you had a few hot takes that you wanted to share, so I'll send it over to you first.
Yeah. Can we talk about Draymond Green being not a top 50 player? I know that he's aged a little bit, but he's still one of the best defenders in the entire league. He rebounds at a high level, um, especially when he's behind some of these other guys that haven't really contributed to winning basketball, or are very unproven. I mean, I'm a big Derek Lively fan, but 56. What are we doing here? I know it's look at projecting the season, and he plays his role very well. He rebounds the basketball, plays great defense uh, and he's a great on the boards. But what are we doing here? He pretty much just catches lobs, and he doesn't make free throws, and we've seen him make one career three. So maybe he does learn how to shoot at an average level, but 56 seems a little high, and that's coming from the Mavs guy.
Hey, I appreciate you calling out Draymond Green from my Golden State Warriors. I felt like he was thoroughly disrespected as well. And, we see another Warrior a little higher up, Klay Thompson at 71. I understand coming off the injury and hasn't really showed his flashes as he was before the injury. But at some point, when you're putting these rankings together, you got to respect what they've done and the amount of work that they've put into it. So I appreciate the call out for Draymond Green, but wanted to make sure and throw my guy Klay Thompson in there. And I'll throw another guy actually that's above Draymond Green that I was surprised on. Alex Caruso at 59, getting listed around guys like Desmond Bane, Kobe White, and Darius Garland. That makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, Alex Caruso is a good role player, but you got Darius Garland, former All-Star and up-and-comer, and Kobe White, and then Desmond Bane, just one of the most consistent shooters in the league. I just don't see how we're listing Alex Caruso around those names. Connor, you got any hot takes that you wanted to bring to the table?
Dude, I'm gonna say Kentavious Caldwell-Pope at number 62. Like, don't get me wrong, dude's a good shooter. He can play defense, but 62. You know who's ranked behind him? Cade Cunningham, Draymond Green, Emmanuel Quickly. Like, you're really gonna tell me he's better than those three guys? Not a chance. I think Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a great glue guy. He's a great, last piece for a championship contending team. But he's by no means better than multiple of these players who are from like the 70s to 60 range.
I agree. Cade Cunningham was definitely underrated on this list as well. 67th. I think you could have put him in the 50s, maybe in the 40s, and I wouldn't have had too many arguments against it. And the last one I'll throw out there is, how is Jonas Valanciunas a top 100 player in the league? Jonas Valanciunas, solid big man, not a top 100 player in the league, in my opinion. He comes in at 91.
Yeah, that's pretty wow.
Yeah.
I got one more that I'm feeling some disrespect towards, and that is Jaren Jackson Jr. Just 1 year removed from his Defensive Player of the Year award. He still plays defense at an elite level. And I know the Grizzlies were injured last year, and they didn't really win games. But even when Jaren Jackson Jr. was on the court, he was contributing to winning basketball. And I don't understand why he's not a top 40 player.
Yeah, it looks like they dropped him all the way to 55. He was at 31 last season. As you mentioned, probably just an injury thing, but man, that is tough.
I'm gonna throw out one more player, Derek Lively at 56. Don't get me wrong, he's a really good player, and I actually really like Derek Lively. I think he's one of the Mavs, best players, but he's ahead of Darius Garland. I don't mean to be that guy. Darius Garland was an all-star.
The silence was deafening.
Derek Lively, once again, he is a dunker and he can play defense. How are you ranking him above Darius Garland? Anyways, that's just my 2 cents.
You didn't see those videos from the preseason where he's bringing the ball up the court, doing a little spin move, taking it to the rack?
Apparently he's a stretch five.
You mean like how Ben Simmons also hits threes in the offseason and then refused to shoot them?
Hey, I'm just saying what I see. As a Warriors fan, I got to believe this preseason means something to me, because if not, it's looking really bleak this upcoming year. Well, hey, that's what we got for the transition 3. Let's go ahead and move on to previewing the Southwest Division of the NBA. So as we mentioned, we're going to be putting these teams into one of 4 categories, and that's contenders, playoff locks, play-in/bubble team, or rebuild, where they're tanking for flag. And in the Southwest Division, we got the Memphis Grizzlies, the Dallas Mavericks, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Houston Rockets, and the San Antonio Spurs. And I'm going to do something a little different today. So before we jump into the individual teams, I want to ask each of you 3 different questions. But for the first question we're going to go off of is, out of these 5 teams, who is going to win the Southwest Division? Riley, give me your pick, and I think I know who it is.
I mean, it's hard not to take the Western Conference Finals champion from last year. So I'm just going to take the cop-out answer and say the Mavs are going to win this division.
I like it. Hard not to go with them. I agree. Connor?
As much as this pains me to say, I'm going to have to agree with Riley. I think the Mavs are definitely the favorites going into this season. I just feel like the Grizzlies really didn't make any big... I mean, obviously they draft... Well, okay. Well, I don't want to ruin the episode, but I just can't see any other team that made significant roster changes to really compete with the Mavs this season.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, unfortunately, I probably have to go the same way, but I will say, it wasn't an easy decision for me. I'll take the Dallas Mavericks, but I'm telling you right now, there are 2 teams actually looking at this division. I wouldn't be surprised if all these teams made the playoffs, to be honest. I know they can't do that. There's 5 teams in this division, and we'll talk about it a little later in the episode. But specifically 2 other teams, the Memphis Grizzlies and the New Orleans Pelicans. I think both of those teams are sleeper teams and definitely could win this division. But I got to go with what Riley and what Connor had mentioned. The Dallas Mavericks, they honestly had a great offseason, in my opinion, and we'll get into that a little later. But I would pick them to win this division this year. But now, flipping it to the other way, who do we think is going to lose this division? And for me personally, I think it might be between 2 teams.
Riley, I'll let you go on this one.
I mean, it's probably a tough call. All these teams, I think there's some separation at the top, but towards the bottom, there's not a whole lot that separates them. But I just don't think that they've got there yet. And that's the San Antonio Spurs. I think they'll be improved, but I don't think that they're gonna be with the rest of the division.
Connor, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm assuming the 2 teams you're talking about are the Spurs and the Rockets. But I'm just going to say I don't think it's going to be the Rockets, not just because I'm a Rockets fan. I think the Spurs made a couple of pretty good roster moves. But once again, I don't think they're over that hump just yet. And can kind of see them just not really wanting to compete just yet.
Well, man, this ends up being a boring question because I got to go the same way with the San Antonio Spurs. Made a lot of moves in the offseason, bringing in some veterans to surround Victor Wembanyama, but don't know if that's going to equate to making another 20 wins, which is what they would have had to have had last year to match the Rockets. So I'm going to say the San Antonio Spurs are going to lose this division. And then the last question I have is, who is your dark horse in this division? Is there anyone in the division that you think could be a sneaky pick to end up winning it and making a run in the playoffs? Riley, I'll let you go first. We'll keep in the same order.
I think for me that the dark horse team in this division is the New Orleans Pelicans. I think it really depends on the health of Zion Williamson. He's just a difference maker on the basketball court, just with the way he plays and the way he makes the team better when he's out there. We saw it in the playoffs when he got hurt. I mean, he tore up the play-in game and then went down late, and they just weren't the same team in the first round. I do think that the addition of DeJounte Murray, given someone that's a little bit, you know, more defense oriented at the guard position, really helps this team out.
Yeah, for my dark horse, I don't know, it's kind of flipping between two teams, but I'll just go with the more controversial one, and we can get more into it when this team comes up. But I'm going to say the Rockets. I really like the combination of their roster. But like I said, we can get more into it as we go into the episode. But yeah.
Okay, well, hey, this one's a fun one because I actually got a different team. Give me the Memphis Grizzlies. I absolutely love what this team has done. Even though it wasn't a ton of offseason moves, I think they brought in a really key piece. And let's just be honest, last year was injury riddled. This season, I'm hoping it's not going to be. And if that's the case, I think they can make a long run, have a lot of great pieces around them. And I'm hoping to see them in the playoffs making some noise. But we'll go ahead and jump into the episode. So for the first team, we're going to pass it over to Connor, but we got the Houston Rockets. Last season finished 11th in the West with a record of 41-41. Do want to mention that would have been good enough for the 7th in the East, I believe. So would have made the playoffs that way. So take it as you will, but had a very impressive end of the year. And Connor, I'll let you go over your team, what you like about them, and maybe some key additions or losses they had this offseason.
Yeah, man, it's been a while since I've been excited about the new season for the Rockets. It's been a few years since they've really had anything of relevance at all. Last year was definitely a nice surprise towards the end. I know their schedule was one of the weaker ones in that back half of the season, but they took advantage of it, and Udoka had them playing really well. But in terms of key losses, not really a whole lot in terms of like players who contributed. You had Reggie Bullock and Boban. Obviously, sad to see Boban go. Obviously, great locker room guy. You know, always fun to see him when he did get into play. But key additions, biggest one, number 3 pick, Reed Shepard. Looked pretty good in the preseason so far. Obviously, he's definitely had some rookie mistakes as expected. But he's knocked down some really good shots. And then, which I guess I'll add him to the key losses, but they did acquire AJ Griffin as well. But I think we talked about this earlier. He did decide to retire to pursue other things. So I'm going to add him to the losses just because he was on the roster and is now not. But exciting young core here, man. I think we got a great group of veterans. We have a lot of young guys, and we have a couple borderline all-stars. I think players who could be an all-star if they're given the right situation and right touches. And obviously, I think we have a phenomenal coach right now. So I'm excited.
Hey, Udoka had those boys playing. I think that's a great get, and obviously a lot of young talent in Houston. So I'm right there with you. I think the Houston Rockets have a chance to make a run. If I had to put them in one of those categories, I'm going to put them at the play-in / bubble team. a little bit where we saw them last year. But to be honest, I don't think anybody was expecting them to be there last year. And so this year, I could see them making that next step and actually making it into the play-in, maybe finishing out with the 7th or 8th seed and making it into the playoffs. But as you mentioned, I think the big name is Reed Shepherd. Showed a lot in the summer league and balled out, and honestly hasn't looked too bad in preseason. I think they've had 2 games so far, averaged around 7 to 8 points per game, shot 50% from the field, just all around having a good start to his young NBA career, and very excited to see him. But he's someone that I would expect to see maybe later on in the season, kind of work him in a little bit early on, but see expanded minutes come later on once he gets a little more comfortable in the role. And then, I mean, they basically just returned every single contributor they had last year. And so, honestly, I just don't see this team going anywhere but up. But a very exciting young core that they got. Riley, any initial thoughts on the Rockets?
Yeah, I think they're going to be improved from last year. I know that they kind of surprised some people that they were, right there until about the last week or two of the season to make the play-in. I think if I had to put them in a category, I'd say they're fringe playoff slash play-in team. I, I wasn't. I'm not super high on the Reed Shepherd pick. Some are calling him Country Curry. I just worry like Curry early in his career. A lot of teams went after him in the pick and roll, and how is he going to play defense against some of the best guards or the stretch forwards in the league? There's no question the kid can shoot. It's pretty evident. So he definitely will have a role out there. But his ability to defend will either get him in the game more or it'll limit him to where he's coming off the bench for just a few minutes and hoping he can knock down 3 or 4 threes. But well, I would like to take a minute and talk about what I call the steal of last year's draft and Cam Whitmore. I think that dude can play some ball, and I don't know how he fell to pick 20 in last year's draft. Um, he was lighting it up down the stretch last year, and I'm excited to see how he can progress with a full off season in the NBA.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on Cam Whitmore because I think if he's on a different team, I think there's a good chance he's in that starting lineup. But I think this highlights a big thing with the Rockets is I think right now they have too many mouths to feed. You have Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith, Alperen Şengün, and Amin Thompson. They all demand a decent amount of touches. Particularly one of them, I don't know why he demands so many touches, being Dylan Brooks. Watching him in the preseason, I know he's on my team and he has really good stretches, but sometimes he thinks he's LeBron James and he's not. He's just he's a good 3-and-D player, but sometimes he doesn't know when to rein back his role, if that makes sense. So personally, I would love to see Cam get more minutes. Like you said, steal of the draft. People were worried about his injuries coming into the league, so he slid really far. But I think he's proven people wrong, and the Rockets are the ones who took a chance on him, and it's paying off for him.
Yeah, he's definitely proven people wrong. Top 10 for sure, maybe top 5 rookie from last season. So I completely agree there, and I think that's a great take. Connor, interested to hear your thought. As you mentioned, there are a lot of mouths to feed on this Houston Rocket team and a lot of young guys. Are we thinking that the Rockets may be moving off of anybody this season? Because what I've been hearing is it might be a potential for we see Jalen Green in another jersey come the end of the year. No, there's that extension that's kind of looming. So wanted to hear your thoughts on that and if we think that this team's going to stay together or if there might be some pieces that are moved.
Yeah, I think if anything in the last couple of weeks have shown us, anyone can get traded. I think we all assumed Cat was probably untouchable to the Timberwolves, and now look at him on the Knicks. But I know we talked about last week, there's a lot of new financial rules in the NBA, a lot more restrictions for teams now. They can't just keep re-signing their players and paying the luxury tax as, the Warriors did and as the Celtics are currently doing with their starting five. So I definitely think the Rockets have some decisions to make. Whether that's Jalen Green probably might depend how he plays. I know at least in the Oklahoma City game, he shot the ball pretty well from three. I know that was one of his highlights coming into the league, and he just hasn't been at the elite level as he was projected to be. Because I think that's his biggest value to the Rockets is him being able to stretch the floor. But I think, like I said earlier, I would probably like to see Dylan Brooks being moved on from. I just don't see him
Please.
long term, especially with that contract. That's a rough contract. Um, but yeah, I I think if you move Dylan Brooks, I think it frees up a lot for Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason, even Jabari Smith, because they've been known to slide him in at small forward at times. But I'm probably expecting also Jayshawn Tate to be gone. He's definitely been pushed out of the rotation, but he can contribute, and I think on the right team, he'll be good for them. So,
Yeah. All right. Hey, Connor, final expectation for your Rockets. What do we think? Where are they finishing?
all right. So they're definitely a play-in lock. They're definitely not falling farther than the 10 seed, but I can see them getting up to a 6 or 5 seed if they play well. I think it's going to depend how they mesh and who their rotation is.
All right. I like it. I think we're all in the same spot. Play in, bubble team, maybe making the playoffs and making a little noise there. But we'll go ahead and jump over to our next team. And this was my dark horse. We got the Memphis Grizzlies. Last year, just had a tough season, a ton of injuries, finished 13th in the West with a record of 27-55. But we got a core that is staying intact. We got Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Marcus Smart, Xavier Tillman, and then we might have just drafted the rookie of the year, Zach Edey. Bring him to Memphis. I am excited about this team. Connor, initial thoughts on the Memphis Grizzlies. How are we feeling about him?
Yeah. I do want to start with, I think we're forgetting Ja Morant also was suspended for a good chunk of last year, so that also factored in. And then he really didn't get to play that much before he went down for the season. So the Memphis Grizzlies essentially were missing their best player the entire season. I can't remember, but I think he played less than like 25 games, right? If I'm not mistaken. Um, but yeah, I will say though, I'm really not expecting Zach Edey to win Rookie of the Year. You got Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. are your top three offensive guys. And I think as we've seen pretty much forever, the favorite to win Rookie of the Year is probably the rookie who's going to be scoring the most points. That will for sure not be Zach Edey unless we see injury problems across the board. But he's not going to be their go-to scorer. But I will say, I think if this team stays healthy, I'm expecting them to probably be a top 5 seed.
Hey, I'm going to have to disagree with you on the Zach Edey take. I think this guy might be leading the rookies in scoring this year. I'm not going to lie. I think Zach Edey is maybe one of the most underrated rookies. I mean, we saw it on draft night. Everybody's picking him, maybe not even make it in the lottery. He gets picked 8th. Can you imagine Zach Edey setting screens for Ja Morant? I mean, this guy is going to feast. I'm telling you right now, Zach Edey is going to be one of the main guys for Rookie of the Year.
All
But
right.
I will also mention, I will say this real quick. The Rookie of the Year is coming from this division, by the way. That's all I got to say. There's a couple of different options. I think the Rookie of the Year is coming from the Southwest Division. Not a huge betting man, but if I was, that's where I'd be putting my money on. Riley, what about you? How are we feeling about the Memphis Grizzlies and Zach Edey?
I am not as high on the Memphis Grizzlies as both of you are. I think they're a fringe play-in team. They didn't really get that much better this offseason. Zach Edey's fun. He's 7'7" or whatever, 7'5". But he might play 12 minutes a night. I think you're expecting him to play a lot more, but I just don't see in the modern NBA how he plays defense against, the really any of the guards of the world. We could even throw out someone that might be traded because they don't play very good, but or could not play very good. Jalen Green. I just don't see him staying in front of like a guy like Jalen Green. Um, I mean, he might surprise me, but I don't see him winning Rookie of the Year. He'll be struggling to stay on the floor. Um, but getting the roster healthy definitely helps them. I don't think they finish as the 13 seed again and only win 27 games. Um, but it might be a little closer to that 40 mark.
I got the Memphis Grizzlies playoff lock. I mean, this team is 6 seed at worst, in my opinion. I think I have a very drastic opinion of the Memphis Grizzlies from obviously Riley, but also you, Connor. I'm just looking at this depth chart. They don't have any bigs. They got Jaren Jackson Jr., who usually plays a 4. Okay, maybe he's going to play a 5. Sure, that's one guy. Then who's your backup? Brandon Clark. I'm putting my 7'4" Zach Edey in over Brandon Clark. Come on now. He's got the minutes. He's going to play mid-20s. We see it in the preseason, averaging 13.5 points already, over 50% shooting. This guy is going to be a bailout for Ja Morant in the Memphis Grizzlies. Ja Morant and everybody at the end of the shot clock, if they don't have anything, what are you going to do? Oh, let's throw it down to the 7'4" guy who can just do a little hook shot. I'm telling you. Watch out for Zach Edey. I'm not a huge fan of the fit, though. I will say, Memphis Grizzlies play fast, and Zach Edey doesn't really like to play fast.
Exactly.
So that is the one drawback to this. But I will say, all that aside, Zach Edey is going to be contending for the Rookie of the Year. I'm just telling you right now.
All right. Here's this. He's going to get, when they make the playoffs, he is going to get played off the floor, right? Like Riley said, he can't keep up with guards. What are you going to do with a stretch big? Like he steps out there, your rim protector's gone. Because here's the thing, you got Derek Lively in Dallas. Derek Lively can hold his own on the perimeter when he needs to. He did not get played off the floor in the playoffs as we saw last year. He could hold his own. But yeah, I'm nervous about his perimeter defense, and I think you hit it right on the head. His fate here is very weird. He's a slow big. There's not really much else he can do besides dunk the basketball and post up.
Hey, and I understand that. I still think Zach Edey is going to have a good season with the Memphis Grizzlies, and I do think he's a little faster than we all give him credit for. I might be wrong, but sometimes we got to have hot takes, and this is mine. But I do want to mention a few key injuries that have just come out for the Memphis Grizzlies. So we do have two players who are going to be injured for the beginning of the season and maybe some extended period of time. We got GG Jackson and Vince Williams. And if you follow the NBA, but you don't follow it a lot, basically these two guys were one of the guys that weren't injured last year and had big seasons and were expecting to play a bigger role this year when a lot of the core returned from injury. I mean, I believe Vince Williams was actually projected to be their starting small forward. And then we saw GG Jackson, who was a really high recruit coming out of high school, struggled a bit and then made some noise last year with Memphis as well. He was going to be one of the key pieces off the bench. So two really big pieces of news coming out of the Memphis Grizzlies, which not only does it hurt the Memphis Grizzlies, but guess what it does? It opens some playing time for Zach Edey. So just be ready for that. I'm telling you right now, I'm high on Zach Edey. But they also actually just added Scottie Pippen Jr., converted him from a two-way to a multi-year deal. So congrats, Scottie Pippen's son. Awesome. But let's go ahead and put these guys in a different categories. You know where I am. I got them as a playoff lock. Riley, I think you said maybe play-in bubble team, but I'll let you take it away just to confirm.
Yeah, I'm gonna say fringe play-in. I just there's so many good teams in the West. I don't think that they have the talent that the rest, some of these other teams have. They might sneak in as a 10 seed.
Gotcha. Connor?
I'm saying a play-in lock. I don't think there'll be a bubble team for the play-in. I think they're going to for sure be in that 10-7 range.
All right. Well, you got it here first. Memphis Grizzlies, I'm telling you, are making the playoffs, but some other people don't believe it. We'll see what happens. All right, moving on to our next team, we got the San Antonio Spurs. Last season finished 14th in the West with a record of 22-60. And although it wasn't the best season record-wise, we all know that season was all about the one and only Victor Wembanyama. And they also returned a lot of their other pieces of the core. They had Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Trey Jones, Zach Collins, Jeremy Sohan. They're all back. And also added a few key additions with Chris Paul coming over in free agency, Harrison Barnes, and then also drafted Stephon Castle at the number 4 pick in the NBA draft this season. Connor, how are we feeling about the San Antonio Spurs this year?
So I like the pieces, some of the pieces they have. I really like them getting Chris Paul. I think he'll do wonders for Wembanyama. He'll actually have a teammate that likes to pass to him, which is going to be nice. And I'm excited to see more of those lobs that we saw a few days ago from Chris Paul to Wembanyama. But also, I think as good as Trey Jones is, I feel like we should probably see Keldon Johnson and Vassell probably get a lot more open threes with Chris Paul on the floor. Chris Paul just seems to find a way to get people open threes. So I'm excited to see how he helps not just Wembanyama, but the rest of the team as well. But with that being said, though, I can't see the Spurs being in the play-in just yet.
Wow. Okay, not making the play-in. Victor Wembanyama missing out on the play-in/playoffs in year 2. Riley, you feeling the same way?
I'm a little higher on the Spurs. I don't know if they're play-in team yet, but I don't think they're gonna be in the basement again this season. I think year 2, Victor, we'll see that next step. We kind of saw it down the stretch of last season after he figured out the NBA speed. I do really like the addition of Chris Paul here. I know he's past his prime at this point, but we could maybe see something similar to what happened in OKC when he got traded there and teamed up with SGA. I also really like the Stephon Castle draft pick. I think he slots in really nice next to Victor, as more of a defensive style guard. They don't really have that on this team, and was a little sad that they didn't draft Rob Dillingham, or they did draft him, but they didn't keep him. I thought he'd be a good point guard to run the backup unit for the Spurs. But I will note that Devin Vassell has a minor injury and is going to miss at least part of the first part of the season. Hoping he gets back soon because he can play some defense and he can stretch the floor and make Victor's life a little bit easier.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I will say about the Vassell injury, although we never hope for injuries and it's never necessarily a good thing, I will say I think this is going to speed up the development of Stephon Castle because he can kind of slide into that 2 guard role a little bit. Not sure if they're going to start him out initially there, but he has shown some flashes in the preseason so far, averaging in the double figures, shooting in the 40s so far. I think it's only through 3 games though from 3. So I like that pickup a lot. And as I mentioned, this is another guy why I think the rookie of the year is going to be coming from the Southwest division of the NBA. So I'm really high on Stephon Castle. Love the pickup of Chris Paul. I think both of you mentioned it. Gonna super help the development of Victor Wembanyama, even though he's kind of already a generational talent and one of the best players in the NBA. The sky's the limit with him, especially when you're playing alongside a guard like Chris Paul. And then they also brought in Harrison Barnes, another veteran presence in the locker room. I'm probably a little higher on Harrison Barnes than most people just from the nostalgia of the Warriors winning their first title in 40 years with him back in the day. But I like the pieces that they've put around Victor Wembanyama, complementing him with a lot of other young talent as well as some veterans that can help in his development, continued growth in the league. And for me, I'm actually going to put them as a bubble team. I think they're going to be fighting for that 10 or 11th seed in the Western Conference this year. And I really think Victor's going to take them there. So hoping to see them in the playoff, making maybe they can make some noise, but at least fighting for the bubble and the play in.
All right. So y'all both mentioned them competing for a play-in spot. So that brings up a question I have now. So unless y'all want to disagree with me on this, I view the Spurs as probably the third worst team in the West, possibly second worst. Could y'all see a scenario then where 14 of the 15 West teams are competing for the postseason? I think there's for sure one team that is just absolutely eliminated from the postseason as soon as that first game tips off.
What team would
Sorry,
that be, Connor?
Trailblazers. Sorry, Trailblazers. Probably taken for flag again. But with y'all just saying the Spurs are going to be competing for play-in, I'm assuming the Utah Jazz probably aren't going to be tanking either, at least to start out the season. So can y'all see 14 of the 15 teams competing?
I'm going with a little more like 13. Utah was the one that you just mentioned that I think is probably not going to be competing once we get a little later in the season. I think early on, a lot of these teams are thinking we have a shot to make the play in. And once you get to the play in, anything goes, right? You only have to win one, maybe two games in a row, and then you're in the playoffs. So I don't see why teams would not try and compete for that. I think the Utah Jazz, though, towards the middle half of the season, are going to realize we're probably not going to be making it. And then that's when they'll start tanking. So I really think it's more of like a 13 team race in terms of those 8 playoff spots, but obviously up to 10 when you count in the play in. I just think the West is really deep compared to the East. And I don't know if I'm necessarily for it, but at some point the NBA's got to decide, do we just get rid of the divisions and the top 16 teams make the playoffs, top 20 and then the 17 through 20 are in the play-in, or 17 through 24 are in the play-in, or however you want to look at it, because it's getting to the point now where last year the Rockets go 41 and 41, they're a 500 team, and they would have been the 7th seed in the East. But then we have, 7 through 10 in the East still get a chance of making the playoffs, and the Rockets are gone fishing, as the NBA on TNT would say. So it's something to think about. I just think the West is stacked, and a lot of teams are going to have a feeling to start the season that they can make a run.
Yeah, I agree. I think, initially probably we'll have 14. I mean, we'll throw 15 in there if we want to be nice to the Trailblazers. I just don't think that they have, the talent yet to get, once they train a Dame, they finally decided to move in a direction, and they weren't just stuck in moratorium doing the same thing every year, barely making the playoffs, which I think that they at least have a direction. Some of these other teams, not so much. But I do think initially there's going to be probably all of the other teams in the West will be trying to, at the bare minimum, make the play in. But I do think that um, probably towards the start of the new year, some of these teams are going to look at their roster and be like, do we really have the pieces to, even if we do get into the play in, are we going to have enough to win a game or two? And I'm sure, a team is going to go down with a big injury, and probably start tanking, kind of like the Warriors did the year before they won the finals. It always seems to happen that way. Like, I don't think anyone thought the Grizzlies were going to be the 13th worst team in the West last year, and John Morant did some stupid stuff on social media, and then he got hurt. Um, I'm not saying anyone's going to get suspended again like last year, but one big injury and the whole team's outlook on the season could change.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point about the Spurs, though, right? Victor Wembanyama goes down early on. I mean, in the offseason, it's listed that he's put on over 20 pounds, but he's still a small guy for his frame. I mean, he goes down early on in the season. I think that
Oh,
changes the complete mindset of the
oh, it's tank
76ers.
for flag.
100%.
100%.
100%. Yeah. I think that's an interesting question. Connor, you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it on the head for me, Caleb. It just seems like, at least since I've been watching the NBA, which has been since I was like 10, so almost 15 years now, the West has consistently been the better conference. It just seems like even before they added the play-in, the West had probably like 9 to like 12 teams each season that could compete for the playoffs, whereas the East, it seemed pretty set in stone. Like you knew who, 1 through 7 was going to be, and there might have been 2 teams there that could fight for the 8 seed. And then it seems like since adding the play-in, the East has just been like, okay, who's going to fight for that 10 seed? But it seems pretty set in stone. We know these 9 teams are going to be in the postseason. Um, but in terms of like eliminating the conferences, you're going to have obviously the Western Conference governors are going to want to do that. The Eastern Conference governors are going to be like, no, because you have the Rockets, like you said, are going to obviously want that because they would have been in. But then, you have some 8 seeded Heat team, who, let's just say they only win 38 games. They're not in the playoffs in that scenario. So obviously they would have been against it. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought just because if we're saying the Spurs are going to be competing for a play-in, that's 13 to 14 teams in the West that could make the postseason, which is just insane to me.
Yeah, I think this also goes real quick before we jump into the next team. I think this also goes to the parity of the league that we're seeing. These new CBA rules, people aren't able to just pay everybody that they want. It's creating a lot more parity across the league. I think it's getting to a point where it's not just known who's going to win the finals. I mean, sorry to every non-Warriors fan, but back in the day, you knew the Warriors were going to be there at least, right? And we're
Mm-hmm.
getting to a point where it's like we got one team like that right now, and it's the Boston Celtics, it seems like. And then everywhere else is wide open. And Boston's not going to be able to hold on to that for much longer with these new CBA rules. And I think it's just going to, we see more parity across the league. So maybe it's time for the NBA to think, how are we doing our playoffs? All right, well, moving on to the next team. We got 2 more for the Southwest Division, but this next one we got is the New Orleans Pelicans. Last season finished 7th in the West, but then ended up getting the 8th seed after the play-in, lost in the first round to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They have a returning core of the big man Zion Williamson alongside Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and Jose Alvarado, but then bring on some key additions with DeJounte Murray and Daniel Tice, but also had a good amount of losses this season. How are we feeling about the New Orleans Pelicans, Riley?
I'm actually feeling pretty high on them. I think they're at least a play-in lock, if not, competing for that 5 or 6 seed. I mean, we kind of saw it last year, until I believe they until the end of towards the end of the season, they were up there with everyone else. They had a chance to not be in the play-in. But I do think that a lot of that depends on the health of Zion Williamson. I know he just can't really, he hasn't been able to stay on the floor so far in his career. They added DeJounte Murray, which I think really helps them, add to that defensive identity that they're kind of forming with Herb Jones, with Jose Alvarado, with Trey Murphy. I, you know, they kind of dealt with some other injuries last year. I know Brandon Ingram missed some time last year. But I like where this team's headed. I know that they lost some guys, but they weren't the core. They were expendable, and they got probably a better player than anyone that they lost in Dejounte Murray. Um, Jonas Valanciunas, he's a great on the boards, but he got played off the court in the playoffs last year. It does stink to lose, some of the younger guys that they had developed, like Najee Marshall and Dyson Daniels. I think that they played roles down the stretch last year. They stepped up when Brandon Ingram went down, and they tried their best to fill in Zion's big shoes, but I don't think anyone on that roster can do that. I'm excited to see if they can take that next step, and maybe if Zion stays on the floor, he could possibly be in the All NBA discussion.
Yeah, Connor.
Yeah, I was actually at that first game in OKC for those playoffs. One of the most electric atmospheres I think I've ever been a part of. Obviously, really cool to see the Pelicans in the playoffs. I've actually never seen them play before, so that was pretty cool. Yeah, I'm a little iffy on the DeJounte Murray trade, though. I think, like we saw in Atlanta, what presumably was a good fit at first when Atlanta traded for him ended up not being a good fit, along with Trae Young. And I'm interested to see how he fits with CJ McCollum, just because CJ is known for his offense, not his defense. And DeJounte, he kind of needs the ball to be efficient on offense. So you're kind of asking CJ to play less on ball and more off ball, because we know DeJounte is probably not going to be good off ball, as we saw in Atlanta. But one glaring thing that I'm seeing is who is going to be their big man.
Yep.
Like you said, they lost Jonas, but it's like, did they really fill the hole with someone? I mean, Zion can't really play the big man. I don't think he's quite tall enough for that. As high as he can jump and I think as strong as he is, sometimes, the height is just a little bit too much.
I genuinely think the Pelicans are going to run Zion at the center some. I think they'll go in spurts right like that. I think they tried to supplement it with the Daniel Tice get this offseason, but obviously Joe Val and Daniel Tice are two different types of players. But they did draft V. Misi from Baylor, which had a really impressive season, especially early on last year for the Baylor Bears. He's 7'1" rim runner, just going to run rim to rim, can block shots. He might play a pretty big role this season for the New Orleans Pelicans. But I honestly think they're going to do the death lineup kind of like Golden State did, where they run Zion at the center, where just like Draymond did for the Warriors, and then run BI, Brandon Ingram at the power forward, and put, maybe DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, and Herb Jones in there, which would be a very fun lineup to watch. But that was my initial thought with this team as well. The bigs might be lacking a little bit. And so we're going to have to see Misi grow up and grow up quick if this team wants to make a lot of noise. For me personally, I have them in the play-in discussion still. I don't know if they've necessarily made the necessary steps to be for sure playoff lock, but I see them as the kind of 7 to 9 seed range. So I definitely think they're going to be in the play-in, barring injuries. So as Riley mentioned early on, Zion's been injured for a lot of his career. Last season actually played a career high in games with 70. So hoping to see that same sort of, durability this season when it comes to Zion Williamson. But again, if he's playing more center minutes, I think he might be more injury prone playing against some of those bigger dudes. So we'll have to keep an eye out on that. But I can see Zion getting back to all-star, another all-star caliber year with the New Orleans Pelicans. I mean, just a complete man among boys sometimes it seems when you have Zion Williamson on your team. And this team's pretty deep as well. Got Jordan Hawkins coming off the bench, a rookie from last year. Don't forget about Trey Murphy bringing back a lot of shooters. And, they're building around Zion how you should with, a lot of 3-and-D type of players. DeJounte Murray was a good get. I think I'll kind of combat a little bit about what you all have said with DeJounte Murray. I think that was just the Trae Young effect. We've kind of seen it a little bit where good players can't play with Trey Young for some reason. I think it has to do with how he plays basketball. With he just needs the ball in his hand the whole time to be as special as he is. And so DeJounte Murray playing alongside CJ McCollum, I think it might work out. But we'll see. I think this is a good team. Don't think this is necessarily a great team.
I'll add one more thing. I'm excited to see the development of Herb Jones. He's definitely one of the best defenders in the league. I really want him to develop some sort of, isolation or get to the rim. He can knock down a three here or there, but he would he would be like all-star caliber if he could get to the rim.
Yeah, this team is scary on the defensive end. I mean, Herb Jones, great defender. Trey Murphy, a really good wing defender as well. Obviously, we know Jose Alvarado is just a pest on the ball. DeJounte Murray didn't have the best defensive year last year with the Hawks, but again, before that, known as a pretty good defender. I mean, we could see some scary lineups with this team on the defensive side of things. I think Willie Green has the Pelicans playing great defense, just not so sure about how he's going to have them playing offense. And so we'll have to keep an eye out on how that looks. Connor, any last thoughts, or where do you think this team's going to end up?
Yeah, I see them as a play-in slash bubble team. Um, you know, I think it's just the big man issue is kind of what I'm having a hard time getting past. Um, you know, they face the Thunder again in the playoffs. What are they going to do? You know, like you got Chet, and I think, anyways, I just think they can get easily bullied down low. As good as Zion is, he's one person. Um, Especially if you're gonna, play a bigger team, they're gonna get just destroyed on the boards.
Yeah. Riley, you have him in the same spot with the play-in lock, or are you thinking something else?
I think they're a playing lock. I don't see them go unless a big injury to like Zion or Bi. I think they're pretty comfortably in the play in, and could make that some noise to that 5-6 range, but I don't think they're a top 4 seed.
Think we're all in agreement there. Well, I know we got one more team, and this is the reason, or the main reason, I should say, we have our boy Riley on. It's his team, the one, the only, the Dallas Mavericks. I think the big question we have with the Mavericks is, they caught fire last year. Are the Mavericks going to make the finals again? And if they do, can they get the job done? But real quick, last year finished fifth in the West with a record of 50-32, but I will say it was really close around there. But ended up catching fire, making a run all the way to the NBA Finals where they met the Boston Celtics and ended up losing to them. They have a returning core of Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Derek Lively, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, Kleba, Powell, Dante Exum, Jaden Harvey. Basically anybody or most of the people that had a lot of production from last year, they brought it back and then brought in some key guys and also had a few losses that we'll talk about. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Riley to give us a breakdown of the Mavs team and what he thinks is going to happen for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I'm excited about this upcoming season. We got to see, they didn't really stay healthy at the beginning of last year. Luka missed some time, Kyrie missed some time, and that they didn't really have those other guys to step up. And then Nico realized at the deadline that something needed to be done, or they weren't going to be able to compete in the playoffs. Um, and they went out and got PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, who down the stretch were the difference for this team, especially PJ Washington. His ability to stretch the floor and knock down timely threes really helped the team. And then also the development of Derek Lively next to Luca, finally getting an athletic big that can play perimeter defense and not get played off the floor. A lot, like we'd seen 5 years of Dwight Powell next to Luca. He was a great on screener and rim runner, but he just is not the same caliber player. I will say that we did have some some losses in the offseason. I was disappointed to see Derrick Jones Jr. go. He played, you know, number one on their number one on defense, and he took every assignment that the Mavs gave him. He was there for the dirty work and to knock down threes. And then I was also sad to see Josh Green get traded. Um, we saw you see flashes from him, but it kind of had run its course. 4 years with the Mavs, and not able to crack the starting lineup from a first round pick. I think the writing was on the wall there. He didn't meet the timeline that the Mavs had, and then finally getting off Tim Hardaway Jr. He was great at the beginning of his time in Dallas. Arguably was the main piece in the Kristaps Porzingis trade. He had some lightning in a bottle at times, but last season he just could not figure out how to shoot. He just lost whatever he had. He had one game against OKC where he had like 20 points in 12 minutes or something stupid, but other than that, he could not figure out how to stay on the floor. Um, Really excited about the Klay Thompson signing trade. But does he have, finals Klay, game 6 Klay still
Yes, he
in the
does.
tank?
He does. He
Um,
has it in him. I'm telling you.
I know he's one of the best shooters the league's ever seen. Probably top 5 at all time 3-point shooter. Um, but is he gonna be able to play defense, or is he gonna be a cone out there? That he'll probably be the difference maker. I really like the trade to get Quentin Grimes back. I think that was an underrated piece. Um, I I really liked his game in New York, and then he had a weird year last year with Detroit. Didn't really see much of the floor, but I don't think that I don't question his ability to play, especially in a role next to Luka and Kyrie, where he doesn't really have to do anything with the ball. He can just play defense and knock down threes. And then I haven't seen Najee Marshall play a ton of basketball, but I know that in the playoffs he was playing some great defense. Uh, and then another guy that I'm excited to see if he made another step is Omax Prosper. I think he is a freak of an athlete, and I think he could be another great 3-and-D player for the Mavs. I just don't know if it's this year.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it with every single one of them. This offseason basically seemed like we're trading defense for offense, right? Derrick Jones Jr. is gone to the Clippers, but we're replacing that with Klay Thompson. Josh Green's out. We're replacing that with Quentin Grimes. Tim Hardaway Jr.'s out. We got Najee Marshall, Spencer Dinwiddie. I absolutely love the Mavs offseason. If you could see on the YouTube, I'm repping my Mavericks hoodie. They're not my favorite team, but I live in Dallas, so we got to represent. So I'm rooting for the Mavs as well. I think this team had a great off season and has continued to do well. I'm telling you, Klay Thompson is that guy. He is going to get back into form. Obviously not to where he was in his prime, since it's later in his career, but I can't think of a better spot other than Golden State for Klay Thompson to be next to Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. All he has to do is sit in the corner and knock down threes, and that's what he does. Connor, what are we thinking about the Dallas Mavericks? No, it might be hard to talk about them since you're a Rockets fan, but I think you got to respect what they did this offseason. Connor, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I think they did a good job keeping their core together. Yeah, as obviously growing up a Rockets fan, I despise the Mavericks. I despise most Mavericks fans. Riley is one of the few good ones because he's not delusional like most of them. But obviously, Luka is a generational player. I think I think he has some attitude issues. We saw him literally quite literally throw a tantrum on the court, like jumping up and down with his hands out, like crying. But got to respect what they did in that postseason. I don't think anyone expected them to. I think their role players caught fire at the right time. You got PJ and Derek Jones playing like they were like all stars in the postseason. Wild. Um, but I mean, Luca and Kyrie, you're going to have a good offense with those two. Klay Thompson, I will say I'm not as high as you are, Caleb, on him. I don't know. I think it's just hard for aging stars to recover from as much as knee problems as he's had. We've seen he's lost his step. He's not nearly as athletic as he was. We've also seen last season, which this could be him just still kind of getting back into the groove of it, not shooting like the Klay Thompson we know. Obviously, he has his streaky moments, where he scores 37 points in a quarter. But it just kind of seemed like his lows were really low last year. Um, you know, but hopefully this changes scenery and he's not going to be the focal point of defenses anymore. Because at Golden State, obviously you had Steph Curry, but outside of Steph Curry, there wasn't really a whole lot to take pressure off of Klay Thompson. But here, you have Luca and Kyrie are obviously going to be the defense's number one priority. And if you get two guards like that, who can also shoot very well, by the way, and who both can drive, Klay Thompson should get a lot of open threes. So from that aspect, I really like it. But obviously between Luca, Kyrie, and Klay, I'm a little worried about the perimeter defense there.
Yeah, as I said, trading offense or defense for offense, I do think that's the one place where they'll struggle. But I will mention another key pickup that we've talked about, Najee Marshall. I think he's kind of the perfect 3-and-D guy to bring in to replace that Derek Jones Jr. fit. So obviously if, they're struggling on the defensive side of things or Klay is in one of his slumps from a shooting perspective, they can slot in Najee Marshall there, who's a athletic and lanky wing that can, guard and also hit the open three as well. Riley, interested to hear your take. Who do you think the starters are? Because I have been seeing a lot of conflicting reports or thoughts from the Mavericks, community on Twitter.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clearly Luca and Kyrie, and then I know Daniel Gafford started when he got traded to the Mavericks, but I think that for Derek Lively's development, I think he should get slotted into the starting role to continue to build that continuity with Luca, because they're both going to be in Dallas for at least the next couple of years.
And they're both top 60 players, apparently.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a stretch, but I mean, I definitely think that Derek Lively has shown enough to be a top 100 player, but I think it's more towards the back end of that than 50. But and then obviously PJ Washington, and then whether you want some more defense initially, and then bring Klay off the bench, but it's Klay Thompson, so I don't think that you can bring him off the bench. But I'd say it's some combination of Luca, PJ, Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford, and are kind of interchangeable, and then one of Klay Thompson, Quentin Grimes, or Najee Marshall.
Yeah, I mean, you can try to bring Klay off the bench, but look at Golden State. He ends up leaving. Sad to see. I mean, that was more of a money thing, but it's still hard to look. But again, I think it's a great fit for Klay Thompson, and I think it's going to prove to be beneficial for both parties. Last thing I'll say on Klay Thompson is, although everyone thinks that he didn't have the best of seasons last year, he still shot 43% from three, and that's a down year for Klay Thompson. But I think Mavs fans are happy if they get Klay Thompson shooting 43% from three, sitting in the corner. And can you imagine being as open as he's going to get? Probably even more open than he was in Golden State some of those years. I can see that number trending up to the 44, 45%.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's questioning Klay Thompson's ability to shoot the three. Just his form alone, like the way he shoots the basketball, he's going to be an efficient 3-point shooter. I'm just more worried about his defensive prowess with the knee surgeries and the Achilles injury. Um, but I will say that, especially those aging star, or especially Kyrie and Clay, a little bit on the older side, and then Luca's kind of has a history of, tweaking his ankle, or bruising his elbow or whatever. He's had some kind of fluky injuries. This team is a lot deeper than it has been in the past. With one of them going down, it's not having to call G League guys up again, like the past 2 or 3 years. I know that Dante Exum hurt his wrist during the either the camp or the early preseason. He's going to be out for a few months, but the other guys, Spencer Dinwiddie is a proven vet, which that we haven't. I don't think we've even talked about that. He was on the team that went to the Western Conference Finals just a few years ago, and he was one of the main contributors with Luca and Jalen Brunson. So maybe he can find his old self playing next to Luca, catch some lightning there. But also Jaden Hardy is a more than capable to come off the bench and give you some minutes and score. He can put the ball in the hoop. He doesn't do much else, but he can put the ball in the hoop. So,
Sometimes that's all you need.
and then Maxi is kind of at the end of his career, but if he can, if he had a healthy off season and can get back to his form that he had 3-4 years ago, he's another guy that can contribute off the bench.
For sure. Well, what's your initial thoughts? What are we thinking? Prediction for the Dallas Mavericks, where they fit in these categories, and what's your prediction on how they end the season this year?
I think they got better from last year, but they were definitely. I will admit they got streaky and they were hot towards the end of especially in the playoffs, especially against the Thunder and um the Timberwolves. But I think they're just fresh off a finals appearance. I don't think that you cannot say contender, but I'm still a little hesitant with how the season ended last year, and um, we still don't know how the pieces fit together. So I will say contender, fringe contender, playoff lock.
All right, Connor, how are we feeling about the Mavs?
Yeah, I'm feeling like a 5 to 4 seed, which is not a knock on the Mavs. I think it's just how the Western Conference is. I think they're just so deep. I think the teams at the top are just very good. So yeah, I'm kind of expecting them at that 5 to 4 range again, but well positioned to once again probably good chance that they make the conference finals.
All right, 5 or 4 seed. Okay, I think that's a little lower than I am. I'm right there with you, Riley. Give me a contender for the Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, caught lightning in a bottle last year, made it to the NBA Finals, Western Conference Finals champion, but lost to the Boston Celtics. And for me personally, looking at the moves they made this offseason, they only got better. I mean, lost a little defense, but you'll trade it for the more offense. So I think I got to put them in the contender spot. Obviously, last year finished 5th in the West. I'm taking a top 2 seed for the Dallas Mavericks this year. I just like the pieces that they got around Luka Doncic and continue to build around him. And obviously, when Luka's not playing his best or not able to go, you got Kyrie Irving right there. I mean, 2 probably top 15 players in the league. So hard to root against them and go against them in that sense. So give me a contender for the Dallas Mavericks. I think they just know what they got to do and they're going to get it done. Well, any final thoughts before we jump off the podcast from either of you today? Riley, thanks for joining us. Any final thoughts?
I'm just gonna start the Luca for MVP hype train.
Hey, I might be joining you there soon. Connor, what about you? Any final thoughts?
I think this is one of the most interesting divisions in the NBA. I think there's a lot of potential in this division, but I think there's also the opposite. There's potential for some of the teams to not be as good. So I definitely think it's going to be interesting as the season goes on.
Agreed. Definitely a wide range of outcomes can happen here in the Southwest Division. But appreciate everybody tuning in. We only have one more week until the NBA regular season kicks off, and you won't want to miss it. Make sure to be paying attention because we will have a few more episodes dropping to outline the last couple divisions that we have to preview before the NBA season starts. But again, thank you all who are watching on YouTube. If you are watching, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And if you will, if you're on any of the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, thank you for listening there. And please, please give us a 5-star rating. We'd really appreciate it. And as always, wherever you're listening or watching, please leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. But again, I'm Caleb. That's Connor, joined by Riley. Thanks again for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time on Courtside. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.